Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LPL Summer Playoffs round number 1 overview and analysis video. It's finally time for the playoffs proper here in the LPL, and that means we're really getting into the nitty-gritty of where these teams are going to land. Only 8 teams remain in the LPL. Only 6 of them at best will even have a chance to go to the regional qualifiers to try to get to Worlds, and of course, only one of them can be champion here in the LPL. A lot to play for here in round 1 to really determine and establish the pace. Some of these teams winning this series is going to guarantee them a spot in top 6 no matter what. Others are kind of fighting for their lives. There could be upsets, there could be storylines, former teammates going up against each other. A lot of really fun things to talk about, so I'm very excited. Hope you guys are as well. If you are, let me know down in the comments section below. What did you expect from round number 1, and did it live up to your expectation? Very curious to know where you land down below, but let's get into the video. If you are new here, what we're going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover, and of course, we will be looking at the updated bracket at the end of the video, talking about where these teams are landing, what their future prospects look like in terms of how the tournament is breaking down, and whether or not I think they're going to be able to survive. Remember, it is double elimination for all 8 of the teams in this tournament, but if you use that extra life in today's video in round number 1, then you don't have that for the rest of the playoffs. It's not like you're going to be able to regain it at some point. This is a very, very big, time to be able to pick up a victory, and it's certainly not the time to falter, but I'm excited. I hope you guys are as well. Let's get into the analysis itself. And that kicks off with our first series of the playoffs here. And this was one that I think on paper a lot of people thought was going to be a blowout, but it turned out to be much closer and much more back and forth than anybody could have anticipated. It was the number 3 seeded Bilibili Gaming taking on the number 6 seeded JD Gaming. And BLG is going to pick up the 3-2 win, but it's going to take all 5 games, and it's going to take a reverse sweep from BLG to be able to get the job done. Everybody had counted JDG out because of just how bad this team had looked against good competition over the course of this year, but I think that really is the caveat for me, and the reason that I actually did, I think, predict 3-2 in this series, either that or 3-1. I certainly thought JDG was going to be a bit more competitive than maybe everybody else did, but one of the reasons why is because, BLG's not exactly the most consistent team in the world right now, and we even saw that in this series. Not only, did they drop 2-0, but they make a roster change in game number 2. Shadow, who's been starting for them all split long, who's kind of been the player to come in and really elevate what this team is doing, is benched for game number 2. Beishwan comes back in to try and, I guess, reignite what this team was in the spring split, in split number 2 when they were a finalist, type of team when they were going to MSI, and he's almost entirely successful. He comes in and is pretty incredible for this team. I think he played fantastic in games 3, 4, and 5, specifically game number 5 on the Poppy, where it really felt like he was the most important player in the game, but I think that Nocturne is going under the radar in game number 3. I think the Morgana was really big in game number 4 as well. We're seeing Morgana really come back into the meta in multiple different roles right now, which is pretty cool. But for Beishwan to be reinserted into the lineup in such a pivotal, high-pressure environment like this series, down 1-0 against JDG, for him to drop in game 2 and honestly not play all that well in that second game on the Trundle and be able to keep his head and really bounce back and be, and I think in my opinion and in a lot of people's opinion, the most consistent player across the back end of this series, is really impressive and really important. I don't know what this means for BLG moving forward. Do I think that this means that this team is now just going to be swapping out jungle every once in a while? Do I think Beishwan is now just the starting jungler? Is Shadow going to play again? I don't know. Genuinely, I don't really have the answers to those questions. I think these two are similar but different in terms of the way that they play the game. I think Beishwan is much less mechanically talented, but I think that there is sort of a mental ceiling on Beishwan that's a little bit higher than Shadow. Shadow can be a bit more aggressive in terms of the way that he wants to play the game. I think Beishwan is much more comfortable taking the game a bit slower. It's really just about the playstyle that BLG want to go for. I would think on paper that Shadow's playstyle would fit this team better. That's kind of what I've been saying all split long, but who knows? You never really know how this ends up going. And again, with Beishwan coming in and looking so good and kind of, really, pushing this team towards the reverse sweep, I would imagine that he at the very least is going to be on the top of the list for now. But the rest of the team also playing really well. I would say in the back half of the series, you're looking at Knight in games 3 and 5 in particular. The Orianna was massive. We talked about the Nocturne, but really a lot of Nocturne success was coming from the fact that Nocturne Ori ended up being a really big combo, and the Mel was pretty massive in game number 5. We'll get to it. Look at the draft for JDG in game number 5. This entire draft is shut down by Mel. There is basically no way for you to be able to play into that champion, so Credit to Knight, I thought he did a really good job of capitalizing on the setup that he had. He was my MVP pick, as you guys know, for the regular season. I think he lived up to that for the most part in this series, even if games 1 and 2 certainly could have been a bit better from him. Elk is the other player that I think is worth shouting out, mostly for the Ziggs game in game number 4. There are very sneaky, like a bunch of really good Ziggs players here in the LPL. I think people are forgetting just how good players like Gala are on that champion. And of course, Knight has had a ton of success on Ziggs. For them to be able to pick that up early in the draft and then flex it down into the bot lane really makes things difficult for JDG because they had no idea, right? Like the Yone coming into the mid lane ends up kind of getting really punished. We'll talk about Scout, who played terrible specifically in games 3 and 4. Not that he was great in game 5 either, but definitely in the middle of this series didn't have any pressure. And I think a lot of that was just BLG getting into his head in and out of game, which is really, really positive. On was way too over aggressive in this series. There were times on the Bard in game number 1 where he looked absolutely horrendous, where it just did not feel like he was going to be a functioning member of this team, but he eventually got his shit together. Rakan, Leona, even the Elise in game number 5, as much as I loathe to say that, ended up being decently valuable. And Ben was also fine, I would say, on the top side. Really wasn't, like, special, I would say, in this series. He wasn't quite on the same level as maybe the other carries, but I think Ben has been better this year than people give him credit for. For the most part, BLG is just a very difficult team to try to evaluate. I think this team has a ton of flaws, and I think they're very similar to a lot of the other good but not great teams here in the LPL. Basically, everybody outside of the top 2, which I think really are starting to establish themselves, like BLG, Anyone's Legend, Weibo Gaming, even JDG. They're all kind of in this cluster of teams that have the talent to be able to break through but just don't have the consistency. The very least, they were able to stave off the upset and avoid going down to lower bracket, which would have been a nightmare for this team, but certainly want to see a little bit better out of them as you continue going along in the playoffs. And for JDG on the other side, this is obviously super frustrating. If you're upset and frustrated as a BLG fan, imagine how a JD Gaming fan is feeling right now, where this team was up 2-0 against BLG, so much so that they had to put in another jungler, and yet you're not able to hold on. Your mid laner, who's one of the best mid laners in LPL history, who's a legend, a former world champion, a former world finals MVP, sells it. Again, he's had a terrible year. Scout is getting done of the series. He's completely fallen off at this point. Like, I genuinely don't know what to say. And the frustrating part is that he actually does kind of look good in their wins. Like the Galio, the Aurora, he is a part of this team and a part of the reason why they're able to push forward so aggressively in those particular games. But you watch his Talia in game 3, and it's like, has this guy ever played in the LPL before? You watch his Yone in game 4, and it's like, you're just wondering what happened, like where it goes with a player like Scout, because it just feels like he's never played like this throughout his entire career. It's not even just, oh, he has bad hands now. It feels like mentally this guy is not locked in. He's making rookie mistakes. He's making, big errors. This is not something that's kind of been commonplace for Scout over the course of his career, but it certainly is a problem right now. And yes, I get it. You're going into Knight, and he's a very good player, and he can force a lot of these mistakes. And again, draft was something that they really indexed in to try and take Scout off of his A game, and I think they were successful in doing so. But on top of that, you're having Scout in game making horrible decisions, bad roam timers, walking up with no vision, like these things that he just wouldn't have done 2 years ago when he was a back-to-back MVP here in the LPL, when we were treating him like a top 5 player in the world. That was 2 years ago, and now he's sitting here, and I wonder if he's even capable of playing for a top 8 team in the LPL. It really is frustrating, but he is a huge reason why they lost. Not the only reason, though. This bot lane was terrible in game 5, and I know that that's going to go a bit under the radar, but Scout was mostly bad in games 3 and 4. I think Zhuo and Pays were terrible in that 5th and final game. And at least in the way that they operated. First off, what are we doing? What is this Blitzcrank in game number 5? What do you even hope to do with this champion into this draft? You are playing Blitzcrank into Mel, which is already nightmarish, but Zhuo gets capitalized on multiple times throughout this game for it. You know how frustrating it is to watch Blitz throw out a hook, get Mel reflected into the entire team, and just instantly die? You see it once, you get frustrated. You see it twice, you start to wonder why the pick happened. You see it 3 times, and at that point, Zhuo should just disconnect from the game. There's nothing else to say. Pays ends up just walking onto Caitlyn traps throughout basically the entirety of game number 5. Really just terrible stuff, I think, coming out from the bot lane, who need to be better. Zhuo, I think, somehow, some way has kind of been an upgrade to Wink, if only because it just never really felt like Pays and Wink had anything going. In the 2v2, at least, Pays looks better with Zhuo, even if Zhuo's not doing all that much more, but this was not a good series to encapsulate that. Shun actually was really good, and it looked like we were going to be posting all the memes of Shun was right after this series, but just couldn't hang on. I mean, the Kindred game looked great in game 2. I think the Jarvan was strong in game 1. one. Rest of the team ended up selling. Xiaoshu was generally fine, wasn't really the problem, but kind of in the same way that Bin also wasn't really dominating on the top side. You know, this was more so everything else on the map just kind of falling apart. But JDG, like they're so close, and I continue to say, like, this team is better than people think they are right now. I don't think they're good, but I don't think they're not top 6. Like, I think it's clear that they are a top 6 team in the LPL. Do I think they have the upside to be better than that? This was the series to kind of prove that they do, and I'm not sure they did. This reverse sweep really takes a lot of that confidence out of me, but we at least got to see some good, and there's a really good chance that they end up with a good matchup in the lower part of the bracket. Anything can really happen, especially once you start getting into the regional qualifiers, but, you know, this team at least needs to start finding their consistency with their carries and with their stars. But for BLG on the other side, I don't know what the future looks like for this team. I don't know who's going to be starting in the jungle. I don't know what the form of this team looks like. It's so difficult to try and pin down what BLG is as a roster. What I do know is that they are talented, that players like Knight and Elk are going to be just fine, you know, Bin and On. They're going to do well in these big moments. I'm not worried about them, you know, crumbling or not stepping up in the big moments. It's really just about which best version of them that we can get. At least in this series, we eventually got there, but way too many question marks for me to feel comfortable about them as a top 2 team. Then moving on to our second series and our second of the double headers for this first night. Of course, these 4 series took place across 2 days. Kind of ridiculous. We'll be covering the one I was lucky enough to get to cast, but so many games happening in such a short amount of time. Luckily, this one did not take too long. It was the number 2 seeded Invictus Gaming taking on the number 10 seeded Edward Gaming, and IG is going to pick up the victory here 3-0. No real issues, no real problems. They're better in all 3 games, and it really just is, I would say everyone, but definitely 4 of the 5 members of IG that were pretty fantastic here today. And the one that ended up underperforming is the one who's kind of been the best for them throughout a majority of this year, or at least, you know, has stepped up at times in Rookie, that I've really wanted to give a lot of credit to. Not that players like the Shy, Gala, Mako, even Wei, to a lesser extent, have not been valuable at times for IG, but EDG just, they don't have the talent. I'm sorry, they don't have the hands to pass the check against Invictus. There's just no real way for me to believe that this team was ever going to be able to go up against, you know, the talent of IG and be able to go toe-to-toe. I like EDG, but they are the high floor, low ceiling, you know, type of team that you maybe do want to play in the playoffs in round number 1, because as much as they are going to take down teams that, you know, like WE, that maybe don't have a lot of the floor under them, that can have these bad games, you know, if you're IG and you're this talented, yeah, you're going to be able to slaughter them, and that's exactly what we saw here. It kind of proves the point that, I don't know, maybe Top Esports definitely was not onto something when they did not pick EDG, when they chose Ninjas in Pyjamas instead. But let's go ahead and talk about this series. For me, Gala's going to be the one who gets player of the series. I think he was the one stepping up and really impressing me the most in terms of the way he played the game. I think specifically on the Kaisa in game 1 and the Zaya in game 3. Those are the 2 games where it was very obvious that this guy was just taking over and really dominating. And you can give a lot of credit to the rest of the team for that as well. I don't think it was just an AD carry type of effort. It never is. When it comes to the AD carry role, it's really hard to 1v9 in that position in pro anymore. But I think Gala definitely was playing just about as perfectly as you could ask for. You know, there's a lot of credit to go around on IG as of late. I think Rookie and the Shy have, you know, rightfully received a lot of it. I think they have been the players that have really stood out to me in terms of pushing this team forward. But I think Mako and Gala have been excellent as a bot lane duo. They've gotten better and better throughout the year. I think we were seeing Mako play pretty tremendously awful at the beginning of the year, where there were moments where, you know, in the regular season in Split 2, I was saying that he was a true problem for this team, to be quite frank. Like, I think that that is a fair way to describe how he was playing for the beginning of Split 2. Things kind of figured themselves out when IG started to get back on track towards the end of Split 2, especially as they got into the playoffs, and Mako definitely was playing better during that stretch. I talked about it a lot at the time. His reemergence is really what kind of catapulted IG to getting a top 3 finish in the playoffs, and that's really just solidified itself over the course of this split, where I think it's been pretty clear he's just been one of, if not the best support in the entire region. I mean, support's been a position that's been pretty weak. I think across this split, you're looking at players like Hong and Kael as other options for potential like all pros. Mako is very much in that conversation, and especially with both of them playing at such a high level right now, it's just really fun to watch. This bot lane duo is starting to live up to the hype. Remember, when we were going into this year and kind of talking about IG and their expectations, when you watch back my preseason analysis of this team, I said, you know, it's all well and good. I'm glad you're bringing back the Shy, and I'm glad you're bringing back Rookie. Like, these are big names and, you know, org legends that have brought this Orga World Championship, but it's Gala and Mako that are going to propel this team forward, and that is kind of the case now as we get closer and closer towards the end of the year, and as IG is making a really strong case for being the best team in the LPL, which I think is a case that they're absolutely making. Remember, this team is just not losing all that frequently. They are not a team that's struggled or had a ton of turmoil. They are just really talented across the board. We see that with the rest of the way that this team is performing. The Shy is having the best split he has had in years. I truly believe this is the best he has looked since maybe 2019 in terms of an entire split. Now, obviously, Worlds 2023 was the best the Shy has looked in quite a long time, but isolating individual tournaments, this is like a regular season, where he's actually stepped up and been that first team all-pro type of top laner that we know he can be. And once again, he mega gapped ZDZ on the other side. It was not particularly close there. Wei was the better jungler. Xiaohao couldn't really get anything going, and I considered him for dud of the series. We will talk about that as we continue further, but Wei even pulling out something like the Zed in game number 3. He has made this team better, I want to say. Like, him and Jeje, I think, are very similar in terms of their skill sets. I think Jeje might be a better player individually, and I don't think Jeje gets enough credit for just how much he stabilized a lot of IG, but it's true, the rest of the team is playing better now that Wei is in, specifically Rookie, but not sure that applied to this series. I think the one player you can look at and maybe take a little bit of a backseat on is potentially Rookie in this particular case. He probably wasn't even the better mid laner in this series. Angel had a fantastic best of 3 here, just didn't really end up mattering. So Gala, Mako looking incredible, definitely being the two that drive everything, but you can't take away credit from the Shy and Wei as well. For Edward Gaming on the other side, this is more of an expected result. This was also the team they went up against in the play-in stage last split, in split number 2, to get into the playoffs, and they got trounced in that series as well. It just doesn't feel like they have a particularly good matchup into IG, and I think it's pretty obvious why. Again, if you just don't have that high ceiling like EDG doesn't, it's really hard to compete with a team like IG that is so mechanically talented. And we saw that with the individual matchups, even the players that have been playing well and have been playing better than average across this split. Players like ZDZ, who are playing a lot better than they normally do. Xiaohao, who, while I'm the biggest fan in the world of Xiaohao, he's like the channel darling in the jungle now. Like, he's not, a superstar. He's not a top 4 jungler in the league. Like, those are the kinds of requirements you need to have in order to kind of place against Invictus Gaming, and they just really struggled in this series. ZDZ, for me, is the one who's going to get out of the series, but if you wanted to give it to Xiaohao, I think that's also pretty understandable. It really should go to one of those two. I think both of them really underperformed. I think the bot lane was okay. Gala and Mako were exceptionally good today. Palkia was at the very least staying aggressive. I think that there were multiple moments where he was finding engages, especially in game number 1 on the rel and, creating options, but oftentimes it was a bit disconnected from the rest of the team. We see this often in a lot of talented young supports, especially at the LPL level, where they'll see this fantastic angle where they can get 4 or 5 men with like an ult in terms of an engage, and the team's just not ready to follow up. I think better communication, a little bit more patience is going to help Palkia, but generally I still liked the angles he was looking for, and I'm glad he's staying aggressive. He never really got passive in this series, which I think can be a bit of a detriment to a lot of supports, but On is just not it this year. I don't really know what's happened to On. This is a very different player than what we've seen the last year and a half of his career, where he really broke out and became an AD carry that you had to pay attention to, and was like somebody that I was kind of advocating for being in the top 6 or top 7. Like, I thought a team like FPX needed someone like On for a majority of the year when they were starting Assume before they got Jachi, and it's just not been there so far this year for On. I really do think this is the weakest year he's had really in a long time, probably in 3 or so years in the LPL, but you want to talk about the positives here for EDG, it's very easy. We already talked about it a bit with Palkia. Angel was genuinely excellent in this series. I think it's quite clear to me that Angel was the better mid laner between him and Rookie in terms of how these games played out. Rookie had a much easier job because the rest of the team was super fed. Wei had a ton of pressure in the jungle, and obviously the bot lane was just kind of winning. Mako was doing excellent in game 3. Gala was game 1 and game 3 in terms of all the setups that he had, but Angel was really doing everything he could to try to keep EDG in this series. He was generating leads for himself in the mid lane and then utilizing his macro resources on champions like Talia and Ryze to actively affect the map. He just didn't really have a map to affect in terms of how much control EDG had. I think Angel, if he had some slightly better teammates around him, could still be an elite mid laner in the region. I don't think he's ever going to be a superstar from a mechanical standpoint or from a carry standpoint, but on things like Talia and Ryze, like, this is the perfect meta for someone like Angel to get top 3 or top 4 in the LPL, genuinely, especially with how open mid lane is right now. I'm not saying Angel is that kind of player, but I think it certainly wouldn't be, out of the realm of possibility possibility for him to be a genuine upgrade for so many of the top teams in the LPL right now, which I think is just not necessarily what consensus is, but I really do think Angel is just great in that role. And again, he fits the meta incredibly well, just didn't have the rest of the talent around him. So EDG end up dropping to lower bracket, no surprise there. IG move on. They will be taking on Bilibili Gaming in the next round. Edward Gaming now taking on JDG in the next round. It doesn't really get easier for either of these teams. I think this was the expected outcome, but really at this point, it's going to be how IG can continue their good form and whether or not they actually run into kind of a negative like they sometimes do as to what this team's outlook is looking like going into the end of the year. But then moving on to the second day of these best of fives and our first round matchup here. And this is the big upset of round number one that I was very excited to talk about. Anyone's Legend, the number 4 seed taking on the number 5 seeded Weibo Gaming. And Weibo Gaming is going to pick up the 3-2 series win, the defending champions in Anyone's Legend, the team that has made back-to-back finals in winter and in spring. They won Demacia Cup at the beginning of the year as well. They are knocked down to the lower bracket. They expend their extra life in round number 1, and things definitely are heating up in terms of how this bracket is shaping out now that this loss and this upset has occurred. But this is a massive, massive win for Weibo. Honestly, I can't even be all that surprised. I predicted AL 3-2 in this series when basically everybody else was looking closer to a 3-1. I don't think a lot of people expected Weibo to actually put up a fight here. I think people just assume that AL are going to figure things out, that they're going to get better. But honestly, the tape that I saw towards the end of the split and what I saw from AL in the regular season showcased that this is not a team that just has fixable, easy flaws. They have something kind of broken with them right now, and I think that actually translated into this series. So let's go ahead and talk about how this ended up going, starting with Weibo and talking about the good that we actually got from Weibo's side in this series, because as much as we can make this story almost entirely about Anyone's Legend, and I do think there's a lot to talk about from them on this front, Weibo deserves a ton of praise for, quite frankly, just being better than AL in this series. Obviously, credit to players like, Breathe and Light and Crisp that I think played really consistent, but it was TN who kind of carried a lot of this series in terms of the way that he was setting things up. I do think there is a conversation to be had for player of the series, but at the end of the day, it was not difficult for me to decide that TN was the one to kind of shout out and highlight here. This is a guy who has been honestly kind of overlooked over the course of this year. This guy won MVP last year. Like, he is coming off of, one of the best years of his entire career. This is a former world champion, former multiple-time MVP, not just once, but twice in this league. He's somebody who's constantly been at the top of the standings ever since he broke through. Like, this guy deserves to be considered one of the best junglers in the world, and I feel like we've lost the plot a lot on what TN is as a player. He is the definition of aggression. He is the definition of greed in a lot of cases in terms of the way that he plays, but he generates resources at a clip that most other junglers can't compete with. It's why I've always compared him to players like Kanavi, because I think playstyle-wise, he kind of fits into that conversation where his early games are just so dynamic and so difficult to deal with, and he is one of the most aggressive mid-game junglers. If you're not able to keep up with him, he is going to outpace you. He's going to force you to make decisions, and he's going to force you to do the right thing. And, teams that can do that consistently have been able to beat him, but teams that can't, they just cannot deal with what TN is capable of doing. And what is AL's biggest weakness right now? It's their mid-game decision-making, and TN fully exploited that in this series, where he did just end up kind of taking over. I loved the Kiana game in game number 2. There is rightfully a lot of credit going to other members of this team. Xiao, who I think was excellent in that game. Light, I think, was excellent in that game, but compounding that on top of the Nefiri carry in game number 3, where he ends up doing so much damage and really taking over that game. The Lee Sin in game number 5, the kicks that he was able to land in some of those fights, even the ones that they lost, were absolutely massive. It felt like he was the only one playing consistent throughout the entire game. It's just awesome stuff. TN absolutely showed up here today. And again, for a player that we really haven't mentioned all that much on this channel, or really in a lot of capacities in 2025, I think he's making his presence known now that it's time to qualify for Worlds. And, we'll get to it. He was just straight up better than Tarzan, and it's not been particularly close. Honestly, TN has a strong argument for being better than Tarzan right now in the form that he is in. So we'll talk about it, but, credit to the rest of the team. Xiaohu's KDA doesn't look all that, sexy in terms of the way that it's set up, but he was really effective in this series, even pulling out something like Morgana mid, even if it didn't work out in game number 4. But the Annie, the Rise, the Twisted Fate, these more macro-oriented picks, that's absolutely the style that Weibo wants to play, and there's so many of these champions that are available and successful in the meta right now. Again, he got to play basically all of them in this series, and even if the TF almost cost them game number 5, it does end up working out for them. Light, I think, played the best of 5 he has played in quite a long time. He's starting to get back into form. I'm not willing to fully commit to Light being back just yet, but certainly the last 2 weeks or so, it's been a huge difference between Light all year long and Light now. And if he's just going to be figuring shit out as we get into the playoffs, that's perfectly fine by me. I'm not going to worry about that too much. Crisp, Breathe, they were along for the ride as well. But truly, like, the standout role for me for Weibo was that jungle gap that was generated by TN. And if he's going to be that MVP superstar caliber jungler that they thought they were bringing in the offseason, that could be a game changer for Weibo. And for AL on the other side, at this point, like, we can pretty confidently say that this team is not just going to figure it out, that all their problems from the regular season aren't just going away and they're not just getting solved. Like, the things that were going wrong for them in the regular season were in this series, and that's the reason they're moving down to the lower bracket. Dud of the series for me is Tarzan, and I'm going to stand on this. I am Tarzan's biggest fan. For years, I have been getting comments on this channel about how I glaze Tarzan too much. He, full disclosure, he's my favorite League player of all time. He's my favorite pro player. Him and Froggen really are the two that I've watched, and I've just been like, I always want to cheer for you. I always want you to succeed, but I am unbiased in terms of the way, or at least I try to be unbiased in terms of the way that I evaluate these players on this channel. And quite frankly, I cannot look at the way that Tarzan has played, especially Split 3, but even a lot of Split 2, and say that he is anywhere close to where he was at the beginning of the year, and even anywhere close to what he was last year. I think there is a strong argument that Split 3 is Tarzan's worst split ever. I truly do believe that we are starting to enter a conversation about that, and part of that is just that I believe Tarzan has been so consistent over the course of his career, but like, the reality is I really don't agree with a lot of the analysis. Not to throw shade at LPL English. I love LPL English and I love the people I work with. I cannot believe that he's going to be getting voted as a first or a second team All-Pro jungler. Like, I truly don't know what else I can say. I think this guy has cost his team so many games. I think he's pretty heavily out of position. And yeah, you want to talk about the fact that his team's not helping to follow up, or that Kyle is actually expending too many resources moving around with Tarzan and playing around the mid game. I think that is a valid thing to say, but the reality is that I can only judge what they are on the Rift. And right now, Tarzan is in bad spots, making bad plays, and taking bad fights, and costing his team games. He really is kind of the problem right now, and that's the issue that we've been talking about for AL, is that he is also the solution. Tarzan is going to be the player that elevates them to winning the LPL, and he's also going to be the one that could hold them theoretically back from being as relevant towards the back half of the year. This team goes as Tarzan's form goes. Nobody else on this team is going to be able to step up and carry games. He either is going to be good enough or he isn't, and unfortunately today, he just wasn't, and he has to be better. There is nothing else to say in that regard. I think there are other players on the team to be critical of. I think Hope and Kyle have really taken some major steps back. Hope has been, playing the worst league of his entire year over the past 3 weeks. That's not a great time for that to happen. Kyle, I think, also has started to run into some, errors and mistakes. I think he played some of these team fights just about as terribly as you possibly could in some of these games. Shanks' scoreline looks really good. Yeah, in the wins, he was really good. When you look at game 1 and game 4, he was kind of a stat pattern and accumulator. Like, the Orianna took over and was awesome in game 1, and he mega ran game number 4 on the Kassadin, but Game 2, Game 3, he was inting, like, actually running it. Like, you want to talk about the games that mattered, the games that they lost, and, where the diffs were. Shanks was terrible in their losses. Flandra was generally fine. I think he was probably the most valuable player on the team here today, and I continue to be a bit higher on Flandra's performance, part of that being because I think Tarzan has been so bad over the course of this split, and, maybe so bad is, like, too harsh. Like, I think he's just been the 4th best jungler instead of, like, a top 3 one. Like, I think that's kind of the standard that we hold him to, but TN was a player that you would have thought, Tarzan should be able to handle, and he just wasn't. He was outclassed here today. The reality of the situation is that AL will not be good again until Tarzan starts taking over, because this is a 6th or a 7th place team with an all-star, like a top 5 player in the world caliber jungler, and if all of a sudden that top 5 player in the world starts playing worse, you don't have an all-star roster around him to be able to deal with that kind of problem, and I think that's just the reality of what we're seeing for AL as they head down to the lower bracket, and it doesn't get easier. Again, their extra life is expended, but because you're in the lower bracket in round 1, you have to play so many more best of 5s in order to get to that final. And, this is a team that made back-to-back finals. They should not even be in the regional qualifiers. This is a team that should be looking at Worlds as their target right now. Their best hope is that they can survive and even make it there in the first place, because Weibo is hot on their heels and right now has to be considered a bigger threat to even make the tournament. That's how scary it's getting for AL. TN was excellent. Xiaohu is peaking at the right time. Light, I think, is peaking at the right time. Weibo seemed to have found some magic, and once again, it's the magical Weibo run right before World starts. This script is getting so consistent year over year, but certainly as somebody that enjoys some parity, we'll just say, in the LPL, I wouldn't have it any other way. It's really fun to see Weibo step up now. But that's going to bring us to our fourth and final series of the video here, and this one I got to cast live, so it might be a bit quicker. I always say that, and it never actually is. It was the number 1 seeded Top Esports taking on the number 9 seeded Ninjas in Pyjamas that they themselves selected with that number 1 seed advantage, and they look pretty smart here by taking the 3-1 series win. They end up leading in kills in all 4 games, and really, they were the better team here today. I don't even think I did a good enough job really going over it while I was on broadcast here, but, you know, there are some pluses and minuses to Top Esports game. Generally speaking, I think this was a very good showcase and a very good showing from them. They had some problems. They had players underperform in some certain moments on some certain champions, but for the most part, they just kind of outplayed NIP in almost every single area. NIP had some terrible performances from some really crucial players of theirs that just didn't really step up and, you know, make everything happen here today. And even the game that they ended up winning was a game that should have been more difficult than it actually was. TES just made a couple of mistakes, and I think you play that game specifically, even just game 2, 8 times out of 10, TES probably take that game. So, you know, I'm not worried. I'm really not worried all that much from Top Esports. I am a bit worried for NIP, but not in a way where I think it's against expectation, just rather that I think we know what this team is, and it's likely going to be one of the first teams out in the playoffs. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Kanavi, for me, is going to get player of the series. What a series overall for Kanavi. I think he had multiple games where he just was a huge piece for this team, specifically that game 3 on the Skarner. I mean, multiple 3 or 4-man Skarner impales that just completely broke the game open. Yes, was he caught out a couple of times? Sure, but like, you can accept that. You can live with that if he's going to land so many key ultimates and really be the one that enables TES to push everything forward. I think that, alongside the Jhin damage coming in from Jackie Love, was so massive in game 3, and that's the game that really turned the series. That one was in control for Ninjas in Pyjamas until they lost the scaling battle against Azir, Skarner, Gnar, Jhin, and just couldn't really fight in the late game, and that's where Top Esports ended up really sailing the series out of control. I think Kanavi was the driving force in that game, but he was also very good in their stomps. Game 1 on the Kiana, I thought he was excellent, more than deserved that player of the game that he ended up getting. And then the Wukong in game number 4, I think also definitely one of those games where you can see the pathway, right? He was the one getting all the kills, and honestly, he was more involved in that game, I think, than people realize. So definitely felt that Kanavi was the main character and kind of the guy pushing TES forward. He was my first team All-Pro jungle. I think, you know, Tarzan's getting a lot of credit. I think, all due respect to Tarzan, again, I'm the biggest Tarzan glazer on the planet. He's my favorite player. Tarzan and Kanavi are not in the same universe right now in terms of where they played the game. The fact that there was any sort of conversation over first team All-Pro, I just don't understand. That's to the credit of Kanavi, and I think he proved that in this series. Jackie Love is the other player that I think was just consistent throughout basically every single game here. I think the Jhin game was exceptional, but the Caitlyn just absolutely obliterated game number 4 as well. He ends up getting this massive lead because of a disastrous level 1 from Niket, who just throws away the entire game on the Elise by taking one of the worst paths you'll ever see down to the bot lane. Truly one of the most questionable things you will see in a long time. Jackie Love more than took advantage of it, was up 30-40 CS on the Misfortune in this matchup, which is very, very bad for Leave, and he really is able to kind of move that game out of control. Unara was also great in game number 1. He's really good at team fighting. Jackie Love, obviously we hyped it up a lot on broadcast, potentially his last playoff run. You don't want to try to speculate on what, you know, players are going to do. He has spoken quite a lot on, you know, having some health problems, so if this is potentially his last year playing professionally, you know, he's looking about as good as you could possibly ask for. He ended up getting the MVP award right before this series, and he more than deserved it. 369 was huge on the Mbessa in game number 4. I think the Gnar was also massive in game number 3. He really showed up in the back end of this series. Cream was awesome on the Akali. He was the player of the game for game number 4. Without a doubt, he was the most relevant player in that game, completely took over the entirety of it on the Akali, ended up breaking Doingbee's ankles multiple times throughout that. I love the Akali into Orianna matchup, and I think Cream played it great. If he wasn't so garbage on the Aurora and the Azir in games 2 and 3, then maybe I would have considered him for player of the series, but the Azir still looks very uncomfortable. He missed every single ultimate, and then the Aurora was also quite negative in the mid lane. Hong was solid as well. You know, not really a ton to talk about from a support perspective. Some good plays, some bad plays. I don't think he was great in game 1 or game 2, but he definitely showed up in the back end of the series. Top Esports were better here today, and mostly off the back of their 2 superstars in Kanavi and Jackie Love that are both fighting it out for being some of the best players in the league. No real surprise there that NIP just don't have the firepower to keep up. And part of it is the fact that they're making a ton of mistakes in this series and that they're not particularly consistent. But also, I think if Top Esports play their own game, it's going to be tough to really imagine a world where they're beaten by almost anybody. And we saw that here. Even in game 2, Doingbee had to put on a superhuman performance on this Rise, and Leave had to free hit basically in the entire back end of this game on the Varus in order for NIP to have a chance to win the game. Nio, I think, only had one good game this series as well on the Silas. Outside of that, everybody really got gapped. Doingbe's scoreline, I think, is indicative of his gameplay. I actually do still like the draft in game number 1. I know Sion is kind of controversial as a mid lane pick here. I think this could really work for the team. It did not. And then the Orianna was awful in game number 4. One of Doingbe's worst games all year long, without a doubt. He absolutely got, blasted in game number 4. I really don't think there's a lot of room for conversation there. We hyped up Leave in the pre-show, and I think he just played his worst best of 5 in a very long time. Didn't really have the opportunity to actually do a ton. Really, the only game he got to play was game number 2, and even then he probably shouldn't have been able to play, but the Corki was okay in game number 3. He just had nothing going in game 4. He would get full channeled bullet times off, and still, like, Jackie Love on Caitlyn would just stand in them auto-attacking him until he died. That's how far behind this MF was by the end of the game. Those were the 2 players you needed to rely on, and that didn't really work out. Solo Kill was excellent on the top side. Nio, I think, had a couple of moments, but for the most part was outplayed by Kanavi, but it's Niket who is going to get done to the series for me. This is one of the worst support best of 5s that you will see in quite a long time. He actively sold almost this entire series and certainly sold game number 4. Elise is already a very volatile pick if you're good at it, with players like Lahen's really spamming it over in the LCK, but this guy has not played Elise all year long, including when she was hyper meta at the beginning of the year. Pulls her out for the first time in game 4 in the playoffs on the stage, takes a terrible path at level 1, ends up repelling at the exact wrong time to take maximum amounts of damage, and then plays the rest of the game just about as poorly as you possibly can. He got caught out over and over again throughout the entirety of this series. He was going in for engages without the rest of his team. This is truly a horrendous series from Niket. He has to be better than this. He has been better than this for a majority of the year. I don't know if the lights are just too bright or if he was just taken off of his A game here today, but truly the worst he has ever played, I think, in the LPL, and it's a pretty bad time for that to happen. But NIP, I'd love to say it gets easier going down to the lower bracket, but guess what? Anyone's legend is awaiting you down on the lower part of the bracket. Now, the defending champions are who you have to go through. It might be a pretty quick exit from the playoffs for NIP, but for Top Esports, nice win here. Really happy for the team that they are stepping up. It's really just about what they do from this point onwards, even in their disappointing split 2 playoff run. Last split in spring, they won in round 1 and then couldn't get past round number 2. We'll see if history ends up repeating itself, but quite frankly, I think this team is in a much different position. I think they're playing much better now than they were in split number 2, and I feel pretty confident that alongside IG, this is likely a top 2 team in the LPL. All right, but that is going to do it for my LPL round number 1 overview and analysis video in the Split 3 playoffs. Up on the screen, the updated bracket after round number 1. Top Esports, Weibo Gaming, Invictus Gaming, Bilibili. Moving on to round 2, NIP, AL, EDG, and JDG down in lower bracket round 1. We're going to go ahead and preview these matchups that we're going to be covering in the next video, but as a reminder, I am going to be live for one of them. It will be the Ninjas in Pyjamas and Anyone's Legend series. I will be on the LPL English broadcasting, channel. I don't know why I worded it like that, a very strange and odd way to say it, but I will be color casting for that series. Links to, of course, LPL English are down in the description below, YouTube and Twitch, whichever you prefer, but let's go ahead and preview the matchups that we're going to get throughout all of round number 2 and talk about who I think is going to be moving forward, starting from top to bottom with Top Esports taking on Weibo Gaming. Again, I think TES is one of the top 2 teams right now, and as much as I do think Weibo is peaking at the right time, Weibo needs to go on their lower bracket run. That's kind of become a yearly tradition for them as well, so I think TES will be able to pick up this series. My prediction for it is TES 3-1. I do still think they drop a game, but I think this is going to be more convincing than people are expecting for Top Esports, and even for Weibo coming off of a big win over AL. I think TES will be the better team pretty clearly here, and we'll move on to winners finals. And then I believe Invictus Gaming versus BLG. I think this is definitely going to be a lot closer than people think. I think BLG is going to put up a fight. And it's not because I think BLG is great or that I think IG is terrible, but rather it's just the vibes of these two teams. BLG have a lot of question marks surrounding them. They just put in a new jungler. They're going to be better than people expect. They might even take the first couple games of this series. My prediction is IG 3-2, but I do think it goes all 5. And honestly, I would not be surprised if BLG randomly won this series, knocked IG down to lower bracket, and moved on to winners finals. I think that's more realistic than Weibo winning. And I know that that might not be the more popular opinion because of how high people are on IG right now, but I think that just kind of is the reality. And that's weird to say for the number 3 seed versus the number 5 seed, but I do think BLG have, a pretty darn good shot of moving on to winners finals. I'm not quite going to predict that because I think IG are very good and I think they're in great form, but I'm expecting this to go to 5 games. We'll see if I'm right on that front. Then on the lower bracket, Ninjas in Pyjamas taking on AL. I don't want to spoil my thoughts and opinions on this too much because, again, I will be on the desk and I will be casting forecasting for this series, but AL should have no problem. This should be a 3-0. If it's anything less than that, I think that you truly have to start hitting the panic button. You know, they need to come out and make a statement, and I think they will. So I think it will be 3-0 for AL. And then for Edward Gaming versus JDG, I think EDG is a fun team, and I think there's a chance that they maybe pick up a game in this series, but JDG should be able to handle this. As low as people are on this team, they have consistently been able to beat up on teams that they are better than, like FPX and WE throughout the entirety of the regular season. It's just been that upper echelon that they've struggled to break through, and I think that will continue. I think they take down EDG 3-1 in this series and then inevitably fall to whoever comes down from the upper bracket. But let me know if you agree or disagree with those 4 predictions down in the comment section below. Very curious to know where you stand on those series. But that's going to do it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a comment, leave a like, leave all of that stuff down in the comments and likes section below. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We're going to be covering the rest of the LPL playoffs as per usual on this channel, but we cover all 3 of the other major regions as well. So LTA North Finals video coming tomorrow. Get excited for that. LEC and LCK playoff coverage is right around the corner. Get excited for that. We've been covering the NACL playoffs as well, and their finals are upcoming. So much going on, so much content's going to be produced on this channel. If you want a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all